Okay, let's go over the endocrine system one more time. We already did it in lab, but I feel more comfortable if you're able to see the models that might actually be on the test. All right, so let's do some endocrine slides first, showing microscopic pictures of the endocrine organs, and then we'll do some models. First, we're going to start with the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is called the master gland. It is the pituitary gland is separated into an anterior and a posterior pituitary. And the difference between the two is that the anterior pituitary secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream. The posterior pituitary is actually a bunch of neurons. The ends of neurons, the axons, are located here, and they release their neurohormones into the bloodstream. So the anterior pituitary, you should be able to see the blood vessels. All this lighter colored of red or pink, those are the blood vessels and the red blood cells. So this is going to be the anterior pituitary right here on your right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, this is going to be the posterior pituitary. So if you see this picture on the test, you might just need to identify it as the pituitary gland, or specifically the anterior pituitary or the posterior pituitary. Let's look at a closer picture. All right, this is a closer picture of the pituitary. Again, on the right-hand side, this is the anterior pituitary, and then on the left-hand side, this is the posterior pituitary. All right, they're like two glands in one. All right, the thyroid. The thyroid produces hormones that are known as T3, T4, and calcitonin. So if we looked at the thyroid underneath the microscope, it looks like a bunch of pools. Like here's the rim around one pool and this lighter stuff that's in the inside. This one section that I'm outlining with the pointer right now, that is called a follicle. So this is a thyroid follicle. The cells that go around to the outside, those are the follicular cells. And then the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, are stored in a gelatinous material in the very center called colloid. So this is where T3 and T4 are constantly stored, and then they're released as needed. This line is pointing to these cells that come around in a circle. These are the follicular cells. And remember, the stuff in the middle, that's the colloid. So the whole thing is the follicle, just the cells on the outside of the follicular cells, and then if we point to the middle, it's pointing to the colloid. All right, this is a closer picture of one of the follicles. Now we can see the follicular cells a little better. They are a simple cuboidal epithelium as we go all the way around. Those are the follicular cells. Again, in the center, this is the colloid, the storage form of T3 and T4. Now let's look at these cells. These cells are in between the follicles. These are known as the parafollicular cells. They're also known as C cells. The C stands for clear cells. And these cells produce calcitonin, which is a hormone that will lower your blood calcium levels. Now let's look at the thyroid and the parathyroid. The parathyroid is a small gland. There's about 4 of them, and they're attached in the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. So in this picture, we can see the actual thyroid. That's what this line is pointing to. And then we have this line that's pointing to the parathyroid. The parathyroid produces a hormone known as parathyroid hormone. And the parathyroid hormone will raise your blood calcium levels if they're too low. All right, this is a closer picture of the parathyroid. Here are all the cells that are producing the parathyroid hormone to raise your blood calcium levels. All right, this picture is a picture of your adrenal gland. This adrenal gland sits on top of your kidneys, which is why it's called the adrenal gland. On the very outside of the adrenal gland, there is a tough connective tissue. It's called the capsule. So the capsule surrounds the outside of the adrenal gland all the way around, where I'm tracing it with the red dot, and that's the adrenal capsule. All right, this line is pointing to the outer part of the adrenal gland, which is known as the adrenal cortex. So where I have the pointer right now, that's the adrenal cortex. It goes all the way around the adrenal gland. It's separated into zones that are called zona fasciculata, zona reticularis, and so on and so forth. They produce hormones like aldosterone And cortisol, that's this part of the adrenal gland. And then the very center where we see a lot of blood, because there's a lot of blood vessel capillaries located in this area, this is the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla is in the middle. M for middle, M for medulla. It produces hormones known as epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are part of your sympathetic nervous system to put you in the fight or flight mode. All right, this is a picture of your pancreas. The pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. The endocrine portion of the pancreas produces hormones known as glucagon and insulin to help regulate your blood sugar levels. Most of the cells located in the pancreas are exocrine cells, and they produce a secretion into a duct. All these darker colored cells, they are called acinar cells, ACINAR cells, and they produce digestive enzymes like pancreatic amylase, pancreatic lipase, pancreatic nuclease, so on and so forth. They are digestive enzymes that are entered into the duodenum or the duodenum through the pancreatic duct. But if you see around here, areas within the darker colored are islands of cells. These are called islets. They're also known as the islets of Langerhans. But the pancreatic islets, these are the alpha cells and the beta cells that produce glucagon and insulin to regulate your blood sugar levels. So this line, which splits into right here and here, those are the pancreatic islets. This line is pointing to the darker cells, which are the acinar tissue. And then let's look at the next slide. This is a closer picture of the pancreas. And again, we have this line going to the acinar cells, the cells that are producing digestive enzymes into a duct. And then we have this line going to these lighter colored islands of cells called the pancreatic islets. All right, this is the pancreas again, a closer picture, and it's kind of a different stain so we can see it a little better. This line is going to the pancreatic islets right here and right here. We can see the blood vessel that is located right here. And then this line is going to the acinar cells, the acinar tissue. Okay, yet again, a picture of the pancreas. This line, it's going all the way down to the center right here. This is a pancreatic islet. And then this line, again, is going to the acinar tissue. So we just had several slides in a row of the same thing, just different magnifications. All right, some structures in the brain. There are some endocrine structures in the brain, like the pituitary gland. So this line is going to the pituitary gland, which is located right here. That is your master gland. It produces hormones like ACTH, TSH, gonadotropins like LH and FSH, and growth hormone. All those are just examples of some of the things that come from the pituitary gland. This is a different picture showing the pituitary gland. Right here, it separates it into the anterior and the posterior pituitary. These lines that are coming down that are kind of orange-ish and reddish and green, those are showing the neurons that are going from the hypothalamus down to the posterior pituitary. So this line is pointing to the hypothalamus, which is a part of the diencephalon of the central nervous system. This line is pointing to the posterior pituitary. And then this line is pointing to the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary produces many different hormones. We mentioned them on the previous slide. On the posterior pituitary, the two main hormones are called antidiuretic hormone, known as vasopressin, and oxytocin. All right, we're looking inside of the abdomen, some of the endocrine structures that we can see in here. We have this line is pointing to this gland, and this gland, there's two of them, one on the right, one on the left. It's right above the kidneys, so that would make this the adrenal gland. So here's an adrenal gland on this side, here's the adrenal gland on that side. This line comes all the way down, points to this endocrine and exocrine gland, and it sits in the very first part of the small intestine known as the duodenum or the duodenum. This would be the pancreas, and we can see the duct in the very center called the pancreatic duct. We'll look at that again in the digestive system. The acinar cells produce digestive enzymes into the pancreatic duct, and they empty into the duodenum. The pancreatic islets inside the pancreas are those cells that produce glucagon and insulin for your blood sugar. Okay, we're going to look inside of the brain again. We'll start with this line right here. This line goes all the way down and points to this gland, which is located in the epithalamus. The epithalamus is part of the diencephalon. This is the pineal gland. And the pineal gland makes melatonin, and melatonin makes you sleepy. So this is the pineal gland. And we'll come over here. This line is pointing to this structure, which we looked at for the last test. This is also part of the diencephalon. This is the hypothalamus. This kind of looks like a duck head, this being the eye and the head of the duck, and then the beak of the duck. That's the hypothalamus. And then this structure right here, this line is pointing to the pituitary gland. So that's the pituitary gland right there. Okay, this is a different view and a different model we haven't seen before, and this is the larynx. And then in front, right below the larynx, we have this endocrine gland, which would be the thyroid gland. So this is a picture of the thyroid gland. All right, this is showing the thyroid gland again. Now we can see where it is in relation to the lungs. So here's the voice box, the larynx. Right below it is the trachea, and then right here is the thyroid gland. Produces T3, T4, and calcitonin. Well, a little redundant here, but again, this model could be on the test. I don't want it to throw you off. This line is pointing to the thyroid gland again. Once again, here we have the thyroid gland. A little closer now, we can see that there are two main lobes to the thyroid gland. So we have a lobe here, and then it connects in the middle through a bridge called the isthmus. All right, this is showing the torso. We can see the lungs and the heart. Here's the thymus. This line, if we continue in, is pointing to the thyroid gland again. All right, you would think this is the thyroid, but it is not. This line and, well, just this line right here is pointing to this structure and this structure, but there's four of them. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. These are the parathyroid glands that produce parathyroid hormone, which will increase your blood calcium levels. And then this line, again, is pointing to the, one guess, yes, the thyroid gland. All right, now we can see the adrenal gland. So this line, it is pointing to the adrenal gland. We can see the medulla in the middle, kind of the triangular shape, and then a bigger triangle around it. This would be the cortex. And then if we went on the very outside, that would be the capsule, the adrenal capsule. But the whole gland itself, that is the adrenal gland. This is showing the adrenal gland that has not been cut in half. So this line, again, is pointing to the adrenal gland. Okay, last slide. I left it labeled for you just in case it came up, but this whole gland is the pancreas. We're going to look at the different parts of the pancreas when we get to the digestive system, but the main part of the pancreas is called the body of the pancreas. And then when it dips down into, or real close to the duodenum, this would be the head of the pancreas. And then we go all the way down to the very other end where it's close, really close to the spleen, which is right here. This would be the tail of the pancreas. So the main part, the main portion of the pancreas, it is called the body of the pancreas. And that concludes this part of the endocrine system.